a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Illinois' 11th Congressional District. As of 2015, Congressman Weller is the managing principal of New World Group Public Affairs, a lobbying group with offices in Washington, D.C., Florida, and Guatemala. He was also a global development officer for an IPTV company called VIPTV. Dear Congressman Weller, we are happy to have you with us today. And because we do not want to waste your time, first let me invite our rector to take the floor. Rector Damian, the floor is yours.
Dear Mr. Weller, dear Vice Rector Luni, dear my colleagues, and dearest my student. Let me thank firstly Mr. Zeka giving the opportunity to have Mr. Weller here, and also to thank you for coming here and giving your contribution today in this lecture. I'll try to be short because as I remember the speech of previous rectors in my university, not in this university, they all single speech were very boring, and I will try today to be very short, to be less boring than my colleagues before. I will not also speak for the growth of AAB. This institution, starting from 15 years ago until today, grew very fast and becoming the most, the first university, non-public university in the region, and also coming to the top, highest ranked university in webometrics in the region. Today, let me tell you, my dear students, for my feelings, how much enthusiastic and eager I am at this moment. I have special feelings because it's my first lecture speech, and I introduce you to you as maybe you don't know. It is not because of that today's speech is dedicated to a special person coming from special country, Jerry Weller from USA, a country that protected us in 1999 from humanitarian catastrophe, a country well known for economic development, and above all, a country considered as a temple of the world democracy. And now we are honored to listen to Mr. Gerald lecture about current political development in USA as an active contributor in politician of USA. My dear students, take the opportunity to ask Mr. Welly whatever you want, but please don't ask him neither for travel, how to travel in USA to take the visa. Please don't ask him for working visa in USA. Ask him how to build the land of dream in Kosovo, how to make Kosovo a country, or dreams reflecting to the political, social, and economic movements in USA. And in the end, God bless America, God bless Kosovo, God bless American and Kosovo friendship. Thank you, Mr. Waller.
Thank you, Rector Demiaha. Honorable Congressman Weller, we all agree that politics is conflictual, political process matters, and politics is everywhere. According to this question, other questions that might pose are, what does politics reflect? And then, is politics explainable? Can political outcomes be understood in terms of decisions made by individuals? So I will give you the floor and hope that you will have a nice time with our students. Please.
Do I need to push this so there's a green
No,
light?
it's okay. No, fine.
As long as the light's on,
Yeah.
it works. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here at AAB this morning, to have a chance. Rector, thank you for your warm welcome from you and the staff and faculty, and particularly the warm welcome from the students. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I want to thank my friend Arjan Zeka, who's Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce of Kosovo, for seeking the opportunity for me to come by. Thank you, Arjan. I appreciate all the good work you do on advancing the U.S.-Kosovo commercial relationship, which is very, very important. You know, as I was thinking as I came over today, you know, I've got a group of students who are well-informed, they're well-educated, and of course I assume they have strong opinions. I know I did when I was at the University of Illinois a long, long time ago. And of course, I also understand that the level of information regarding how the U.S. government works and decides on its policies may be, there'd be different opinions and different understandings. So I thought this morning I'd give a little bit of background on how the U.S. government is structured, talk a little bit about my experiences as a member of the United States Congress, and then, of course, you may have some questions on current events in the United States that you'd like to discuss with me while I'm here. And frankly, I enjoy that the most because that's where I learn as well. I was mentioned, I had the privilege of serving in the United States Congress for 14 years, representing the state of Illinois. You're familiar with Chicago. There's a large Kosovo and Albanian community in Chicago. I was acquainted with many of them while I served in Congress and continue to be friends and business partners. And so I, of course, had that opportunity. But I represented a part of the city of Chicago. I represented the south suburban area, which was an older industrial area. Kind of a rust belt was the term we would use. Steel, auto, other Caterpillar made a lot of bulldozers, for example, in the district I represented. Then had a large agricultural area. So I represented a very, very diverse district while in the Congress. And before that, I served in the state legislature, the state assembly. While in Congress, I represented 700,000 people. In the General Assembly in Illinois, I represented 100,000 people. So many of the concerns were the same, although the legislative district, when I was at the state level, was more rural. And then, of course, when I was elected to Congress, my district was predominantly urban and suburban. And, of course, as you know, communities are different. They have different priorities and of course, seek different items on the agenda. So it was a learning experience for me while I was representing in Congress, learning about the communities and doing my best to represent them. But I started out in politics as a volunteer, volunteering in a political campaign back in 1976 when I was a freshman at the University of Illinois. And a young man by the name of Tom Corcoran, who was about 33 years old, was running for Congress. And I volunteered in Tom Corcoran's campaign. And he won. So the day after the election, and back then, it was before the internet, before the fax machine, we had, everybody was in the phone book. So I called up Tom Corcoran at home the day after the election and said, Tom, congratulations. You won the election. By the way, if you remember me, I was the guy, I helped you in this parade, I helped you in this event, I was at this activities, and I want to be your first intern in your congressional office. Well, lo and behold, he wasn't offended. He was actually, I guess, impressed enough. He gave me the opportunity to be his first intern. And that really began, for me, my political career. And of course, I was active while in college in Republican politics, and then served in the Reagan administration under President Reagan as an aide to the Secretary of Agriculture. And I started out kind of as his body man. I carried his coat, I carried his briefcase. He was a marathon runner, so I was in great shape. I ran every day, about 8 to 10 miles with him every day. And I eventually did more media and congressional affairs. And after about 4.5 years, I went back to the Illinois farm that I grew up on and ran for the state legislature. And I was challenged in the primary by the leader of the old guard, the old leaders in the Republican Party. And the gentleman, I was 26 when I announced for the state legislature, and the person I was running against was 63. So my slogan was vigorous new leadership. I went out and out-hustled him, and I won 2-1, winning 2/3 of the vote. And once I won that and was elected in the general election to the General Assembly, a longtime political leader, a longtime Republican Party chairman who had elected a World War II veteran and hero, governor of Illinois, back in the 1950s, he told me something I felt was very, very important. And that was, he said, now that you're elected, go and make friends. Make friends amongst the Democrats, make friends amongst the Republicans. Because over your career and over your time that you're a legislator, you're going to need those friends. Because to get anything done, you need to work in a bipartisan way. You need to work with the people in the other party to get things done. And that was good advice. And to this day, many of those who are in senior positions now in the U.S. Congress and in the administration, who I served with in the legislature and in the Congress, both parties are still my friends. And for me, that was very useful and foresightful suggestion and information. You know, the government of the United States is, as you know, for your textbooks, and I may be repeating a few things, but our system, as it was developed by our founders, was designed to foster compromise. Compromise on issues to move the country forward. And as you look at how our Constitution, when it was written in 1787, our founders and those who participated in the Constitutional Convention then, founding our nation, which was then and continues to be today to be an incredible experiment. These founders wanted to ensure that the new government would foster compromise, would foster an equal balance between big states and small. And as you know, those of you who have been to the United States or looked at our map and looked at our populations, the state of New York is much bigger than the state of Delaware. New York has around 23 members of Congress representing it because it's based on population. Delaware has 1. But when our nation was founded, they were each one of the 13 original states, the 13 formal colonies. So the challenge for our founders at that time was how to bring about a balance that forms the United States of America and causes everyone to want to participate, but to feel that they're being treated equally. So when they designed the government of the United States, they kept that in mind. And so our nation, which has a federal system, which means a division of powers between the national government and the state government, as well as being a republic, divides up the powers between the states, our 50 states, now 50, it was 13 then, as well as giving national responsibilities, where the national government is responsible for our defense, and of course in common interests amongst all the states, particularly international commerce, whereas the states are given the powers to administer their own affairs, including how they conduct elections. You know, some parties nominate their candidates in caucuses or in conventions or have a primary election process. That's decided, each state does it differently. States also decide, you know, how their schools will operate. And of course their universities as well. So that is powers, how they're divided under our federal system. And we, of course, have 3 co-equal branches. We have the executive, we have the legislative, and we have the judicial. If you ever look at the dollar bill, on the back of it, you see that pyramid. And that pyramid represents the balance of powers. And when Pierre L'Enfant designed Washington, D.C., he designed the city of Washington to reflect that as well. That's why the Capitol and the White House are on different locations. And if you've been to Washington, D.C., where the Jefferson Memorial is today, that's where he intended the Supreme Court to be located. Unfortunately, they built it across the street from the Capitol, but his intent was, under that design, you'd have a triangle reflecting the balance of powers between our executive, legislative, and judiciary. Our legislative branch is divided between Congress, which has a House and a Senate, Our founders intended the House to be the most reflective and the most responsive to the people. And so every 2 years, the entire House of 435 members is up for election. Abraham Lincoln, for me, one of our greatest presidents, if not the most important and greatest president, he served one term in the House. Later on, wanted to become President of the United States. So we had that every 2 years, have that. And the only way you can serve in the House of Representatives is to be elected. And the House operates by majority rules. There's 435 members, so if 218 members of the U.S. House vote for a new law, that's a majority. Now, the Senate has a similar role, but different. In the Senate, there's 2 senators for each state. And that's part of the compromise of our founders when they wrote our Constitution, because they decided the House, by reflecting the immediate people's will, that seats in the House of Representatives would be allocated by population. Today, there's about 700,000 to 800,000 people per congressional seat in our U.S. Congress. Well, the state of Delaware has 1 member of the U.S. House. Illinois, my home state, has 18. And every 10 years, we have a national census, and after that census, under the Constitution, the seats are allocated. And so our Sunbelt states, our southern states, are the ones that are growing, and the northern states are not growing so quickly. So Illinois tends every 10 years to lose a seat in the House of Representatives, whereas states like Florida and Arizona gain additional seats. So in the U.S. Senate, as part of the compromise, there were 2 senators allocated for each state. And under the original Constitution, our senators were elected by the state legislature. About a century later, there was a constitutional amendment passed which provided for the direct election of U.S. senators. But what's really uniquely different about the U.S. Senate is you can be appointed to the Senate. If there's a vacancy, someone resigns, someone passes away, the office is vacated, typically the governor of each state will appoint someone to serve that term until it expires, and then that person may run for that seat in the next election. But the Senate has a unique role, and that is they perform the role of advise and consent. The U.S. Senate is the body which will ratify treaties. The U.S. Senate is the body which confirms the president's nominees to be the ambassador to Kosovo, requires approval of the United States Senate. You're nominated by the president, the U.S. Senate must confirm that nomination. They confirm the members of the cabinet. You use the term minister here, we use the term secretary for each of the cabinet offices. And the same for federal judges. Federal judges are a lifetime appointment. The president nominates members of the circuit court, the appellate court, and the Supreme Court. They're all lifetime appointments, and the U.S. Senate must confirm those nominations. So both bodies are legislative. The Senate has a 6-year term versus the House being 2. So every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate stands election. So our founders wanted the House to reflect the immediate public will. The Senate was to be the stabilizing, force in our legislative branch. Now, I was in the House for 14 members, so we always looked at the Senate as the problem. Why? Because things move a lot slower over there. Whereas the House, simple majority rules, the Senate under its rules, for something to be considered before for full consideration of the Senate, 60%, 60 out of 100 members of the U.S. Senate must vote yes for that legislation to be considered on the floor of the Senate. That requires bipartisan compromise, because rarely does one party have 60 votes, 60 members. Not very often. So we have the legislative branch, and then of course the Supreme Court, and the judiciary, they have their roles in dealing with federal law. We have state courts, but they deal with state law. And of course the Supreme Court in its role as part of the balance of powers, if there's a challenge to a law, it can be argued before the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can rule it unconstitutional. And again, because of their lifetime appointment position, the belief is they're going to be independent in their decision making and make decisions in the best interest of the American people. So you have the president who has the executive powers, makes the nominations, proposes the laws. Congress must pass the law, but the president can sign it in the law, or he or she can veto it. But the Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 vote. So again, the Constitution was designed to ensure a balance of powers. Impeachment's been in the news if you've followed any of that, and we could talk about that later. I've been through, when I was a member of the House, we went through the Clinton impeachment, so I personally have experienced that. It's a very partisan process, it's a political process. But of course, under the Constitution, the U.S. Congress has the power to impeach and remove a federal official. So they can remove judges, they can remove the president, they can remove other federal officials. And the House and Senate each have different roles. If you're familiar with the term grand jury, a grand jury is a committee that's assembled by a judge and prosecutors to review a case and recommend that case should move forward. That's the role of the House. So under our Constitution, for the impeachment process, the House does the indictment. They don't convict, the House indicts. And by indicting, they send it to the Senate, who then serves as the body. Can everyone hear me? Because I realize as I'm moving away from the microphone. So and the Senate actually is the jury. And the Senate's job is to determine whether or not the House's action on impeachment should be followed, and of course they have the right to convict. It's important to note, to convict in the U.S. Senate requires a majority of 60. Again, it has to be a bipartisan decision in order to impeach and remove the president or a judge. In the last 100 years, there's been several judges who have been impeached and removed, usually for some form of misconduct. I actually served in the House, and there's a member of the House today who is a federal judge, impeached by the United States House and Senate, later on elected to the House of Representatives. And he is still a member, and he was a friend of mine. He was always a good guy to work with. But he has that unique experience of having been removed by a vote of the House and Senate from his role as a United States Federal Circuit Court judge. So that's just kind of an overview of the structure of our government, and I can, of course, go into a lot more detail if you like. But I thought maybe I'd share a few more of my experiences of being in the Congress, and then open it up to your questions and what you'd like to talk about this morning. When I was in the House, of course, I was elected in 1994, and when I was elected to the House of Representatives, my political party, the Republicans, had not served in the majority of the House of Representatives for 40 years. So there was no one who was a current serving Republican member of the House who had served as a Republican member of the House 40 years before, in 1954. So for my party in the House, this was new. And as I've told people, we discovered rooms in the United States Capitol we did not know existed. The only ones that had keys to them were the majority. And of course, we found them during the transition. They had to tell us, but we did not know they existed. While I was in the House, I was a member of two of several committees. I was on what was called the Ways and Means Committee, which is the first original committee of the House, and it's actually mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. And the Ways and Means Committee has jurisdiction over taxation, over trade, over various programs, social programs, and of course, plays a very key role in the spending and revenues of the U.S. government. Notably, in our Constitution, the Constitution requires that any measure addressing taxation must originate in the House, because our founders wanted to make sure that the body with the closest connection to the American people and the American taxpayer was the one who made recommendations on taxation. And then I also served on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And as a Foreign Affairs Committee, I was involved in the original Kosovo project. There's a colleague of mine who's now chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee by the name of Elliot Engel of New York, friend of mine. And Elliot Engel recruited me to the Kosovo cause. And because of his role, there were a number of us that became involved in support of Kosovo and Kosovo's independence and the project moving forward, creating the nation and country, independent, sovereign nation of Kosovo. And that was all part about making friends, because Elliot was and still is my friend. And because of that friendship, I became involved when he approached me. I also served as deputy Republican whip. And whips have different roles in different parliamentary bodies. But in the whips in the U.S. House, both the Democrat and Republican whips, are the eyes and ears of the caucus, particularly of the leadership. If you're in the majority, you're the eyes and ears of the speaker. If you're in the minority, you're the eyes and ears of the minority leader. And as a whip, I noted that within about 10 days of being in the House, I never sat down in a seat again. And if you've ever seen C-SPAN or an image of the U.S. House of Representatives, there's no assigned seats. So members of Congress can sit anywhere. Republicans can sit on Democrat sides, and Democrats can sit on Republican side. When there's formal ceremonies like the State of the Union or an international guest who's addressing a joint session of Congress, there's certain places that the leadership of both parties sit, but everybody else sits anywhere they can find a seat. And in the old days we had desks, but today there are just seats. But as the whip, I was constantly moving around the floor looking for someone to talk to. There were certain members of the House who I wanted to ensure were going to vote the right way, that they were going to vote yes on legislation we needed to pass. And over time you find there are certain members that may not necessarily be always part of the team, so you've got to motivate them and control them to ensure that they vote properly, and sometimes they hide, and you also know where to find them during that process. So I was either working as part of the eyes and ears for my political party's caucus, or I was actually working on my own projects and my own legislation, where I'd be looking for Republicans, Democrats to ask them to support my legislation, a committee chair to help advance my legislation through the process. So I served again for 14 years, and it was an incredible experience. And I chose to retire in 2008. And people ask, why did you retire in 2008? Well, I was a Republican representing a district that was intended to be represented by a Democrat. And my U.S. Senator, who I served with and worked with in a lot of things, was running for president, a guy by the name of Barack Obama. And I thought, you know, I see this wave coming. He's a popular guy, and I'd prefer to win my last election. So I chose not to run in 2008, and frankly, because of the Obama wave that went through his home state in Illinois that year, Republicans lost pretty much everything, all the way down to the courthouse, the local level in our district. So for me, I won my last election. And of course, now I'm out and I've been in private business and serve as an advocate, lobby for various causes. I'm very active on trade issues. I represent the Humane Society of the United States, which is the cares about all God's creatures, great and small, you know, animal protections. And I look out for Puerto Rico and a number of other causes, including saving the last remaining rainforest in Central America. So it's a pleasure to be here. Why don't I open it up at this time to your questions and how best I can try and answer them.
Okay.
You want me to stay up here, Professor,
You can
or
sit
should
if
I
you
sit
want
there?
to. Yes.
Okay. Well, I know there's the other microphone, so I'm happy to stay there.
Okay,
but
fine.
You want to come up if you have some questions you want to start with? Okay.
Congressman Welle, thank you very much for the introduction and sharing your stories. Now let's see if students have questions for you, and I bet they do have questions. So feel free to make questions. Okay, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Basar Vitucci. I'm a public administration student. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Jerry Weller, for being here today with us. We are really honored to have you. So, Mr. Weller, knowing your great work on being an advocate for protecting Social Security and Medicare, something we still don't have, also being a leading voice with the Ways and Means Committee in promoting issues affecting the internet, the new economy, computer education, and high technology, something our youth needs but lacks. And meanwhile, our politicians are focused on everything else except these things, which are the fundamentals of a healthy and successful state. What's your opinion on how to approach, deal, and progress with these sensitive yet fundamental issues? Thank you.
Well, Winston Churchill once said, "The worst form of government is democracy until you try the other alternatives." And first I want to congratulate a relatively new country, Kosovo, on your continued progress and as you develop your democracy. And democracy is always an experiment. The American experiment is still ongoing, and we've, of course, been in business for 240 years now. And so we continue to learn as we go through the development and strengthening of our democracy. So first, I congratulate Kosovo on your elections. I also congratulate you, and I note that the opposition party, which had been in government prior to the election, they immediately recognized the results, congratulated the winners, and of course the transition went underway. That was perceived by those of us outside of Kosovo as important, because all so often we see where the losers tend to be sore losers, and they don't want to go away, and they claim the government, the elections were fraudulent or somebody cheated and that type of thing, which takes away the legitimacy of that election. So I frankly commend the opposition leaders for immediately conceding. That's important to do. That shows maturity is occurring here. I also congratulate Prime Minister Kurti and of course his coalition government for being formed. They're in place now in the past week. That's continued progress, and I believe they have some real opportunities. And I really believe that, as I travel throughout Kosovo, as I talk to young people, what's the greatest question we all have? What is the economic opportunity? At least that's the question I'm asked. I'm a young person, I'm bettering myself, I'm getting better educated, I have this capacity, I have these skills. And so really, every government, whether it's the United States or Kosovo, should always be working to foster an economic environment that provides the kind of certainty where investors will invest and create jobs, and that the young people and the workers in this country have the opportunity to be employed, provide for their families and their children, and have a future. So I would encourage that your new government move forward with an economic agenda that will continue to attract continued investment in the economy of Kosovo, create new jobs. I'm a strong advocate of trade. And while I'm here this week, I'm talking about the importance of expanding the U.S.-Kosovo trading relationship. And we have something called the General Systems of Preferences, GSP is the term. And Kosovo has a favored status with the United States. So there's 2,500 products that can be produced here in Kosovo, which can be exported to the United States duty-free, which means with no tariffs. The problem with that program is it expires every 2 or 3 years, and it has to be reauthorized, has to be passed again into law by the U.S. Congress. So that creates some uncertainty for investors, because they're going to invest millions of euros in developing an assembly plant. They want to know that for the foreseeable future, particularly at least for 10 years, they have a sense of certainty for their investment. That's going to be important. So I think one of the areas where we should be all working together with the government of Kosovo and the government of the United States, particularly our Congress, is to create a long-term period of time for the tariff treatment of products made in Kosovo. If you have a 10-year window where you know it's going to be duty-free for that period of 10 years for apparel, for blue jeans and shirts, that's going to attract companies that want to make blue jeans and shirts because they know if they produce them in Kosovo, they'll be able to export them to the U.S. market where they buy lots of blue jeans and shirts, and there won't be any tariffs on them. So I would again encourage the new government to really be focused on economic growth.
So, Honorable Mr. Congressman Weller, yes, Honorable Mr. Rector, Honorable Academic Staff of AAB University, dear students, colleagues, I am Festina Curtesce, student of Public Administration Faculty, the program of Political Sciences and Diplomacy here in AAB University. I would like to thank you a lot for this great lecture. I really learned a lot from it, and I'm so thankful. And I would like to ask you what's your opinion and suggestion on the 100% economic tax with, and the issues with Serbia, knowing that you support the free trade. Thank you.
Sure. Well, first, I want to commend you for the way you began your question. Everybody is honorable. And you're destined to be a parliamentarian, I can tell. Because when I was in the Congress, we'd be debating, and I'm a Republican. My Democratic friends would be we'd be arguing in the Congress, and we'd always refer to each other as my good friend, my really good friend, my really, really, really good friend. And I'd always joke with people. I'd say, you can always tell how good of friends we are by how many reallys and my and good and friend are in that process, but I commend you on how you began your statement. As you noted, I am a free trader. When I was in Congress, I was very active in advancing bilateral and multilateral trade agreements between the United States and our trading partners. Much of the focus at that time was in the Western Hemisphere, Panama, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, the Central American country, Chile, Peru. We're all part of the, our process as we were advancing the cause. We also enacted a trade agreement with Israel and Australia and a number of other countries during that time. And of course, in an ideal world, there's no trade barriers. So, in an ideal world, there's no need for tariff. And Kosovo is an independent country and deserves recognition as an independent country. And basically half of the world's nations so far today have formally recognized Kosovo as an independent country, establishing diplomatic relationships. Unfortunately, there are some, including Serbia, who have been working against the recognition process for Kosovo, and frankly, it holds Kosovo back in many ways. Their ability to do that, particularly economically, because it creates a little less certainty for international companies looking to invest, because the political question remains because of what Serbia has done in that process. I really believe, number one, it's in Serbia's best interest to recognize Kosovo and move forward. I think it's in their best interest for the two nations to have a friendly relationship and to increase what I call their economic integration. And the ultimate goal here should be full integration of the two economies so that there's free trade moving back and forth. Products produced in Kosovo have the same treatment when they enter the market in Serbia as Serbian products entering Kosovo. That's the goal, and that's the way it should be, and I believe that's what we should be working towards. I'm a legislator, and I always believed that it was kind of a guy that always wanted to reach the middle. Let's see what we can get done. And there's a compromise to this process. Ambassador Grinnell has been named as President Trump's personal emissary here. He's been here. And recently when he was here, his message was all about economic growth and increasing the opportunity. And because of his personal intervention, we now have the reestablished air link between Belgrade and Pristina. There's, moving forward on improving the highway access, potentially a railroad. Those are all positive steps. The bottom line is to achieve good economic growth in the Balkan region, we really need to see full integration of the economies. And that requires equal access to each other's markets. So.
Honorable Congressman, Mr. Jerry Weller. I'm Leandrit. I'm a law student, second year. First of all, I would like to thank you for taking your time to discourse political issues with us. It's been very helpful. My question to you is actually in regard to the 2021 fiscal year budget proposal by President of the United States, namely the tax cuts to environmental activity, social security, medical care, even cutting funds to the CDC in times of a pandemic, instead focusing on increasing budget towards national security, fossil fuel production, etc., tax cuts, etc. I would like to know your opinion on the proposal of the President for the budget of the fiscal year 2021, and whether you think it would benefit the citizens of the United States or whether it would harm them. Thank you.
Sure. Well, there's an annual process in our Congress which our President plays a role, and that's the budget process. And the most basic responsibility of our legislature, the same as your Parliament, is ensuring the proper funding of government activities and services. And so every year, under our budget requirements, the President is required to submit a budget to the Congress. And then Congress goes through the budget process. Now, when I was a member of Congress, whether the President was a Republican or Democrat, we'd always say, you got to remember, the President proposes and the Congress disposes. So the Congress they'll look a little bit at the President's budget. It doesn't matter if it's President Clinton or President Trump or President Obama or President Bush. They will look at it, but Congress will set its own priorities. And so rarely is the blueprint offered by any president adopted by the Congress. So, in fact, Congress will sometimes use it as a whipping boy. They'll attack it so that they can promote whatever cause they have. So I don't expect most people, including myself, have not read the details of the President's budget. I haven't had time. So he just put it out, but Congress will work it out. And today we have a bipartisan Congress. The House is controlled by Democrats in the majority, and the Senate is controlled by Republicans in the majority. And they have their priorities, and they'll work with the administration, with the President and his team to finalize a budget agreement. But Congress never takes any president's budget other than they all receive it, somebody in the staff analyzes it, and then they move forward with the budget they want to see. And then, of course, again, it has to be a compromise because the House and Senate must adopt the same process. One thing that's important to point out, when something becomes law in the United States, both branches of the Congress must pass it, approve it with a majority vote. So, and if they each pass a different, legislation is different, so in the budgets, the fine print of the budgets are different, they have to go to what's called a conference committee, and the House and Senate conferees work out the differences. Then that conference report goes back to the House and Senate, and it's adopted by the Congress and sent to the President. Of course, Congress hopes the President will sign it into law. The President can veto it, send it back. When I was in my first term in Congress, we sent several balanced budgets to President Clinton, and he vetoed them. So we had to work through a process with the Congress, which was controlled by the Republicans, needed to come to a compromise with the Democratic president as part of that process.
Hi, Ernest Verstica, Public Administration, Program Political Science and Diplomacy. I wanted to ask you, on your professional point of view, what do you think Kosovo lacks in terms of politics, and what do you think we have to, or politicians have to do in progress to develop our country?
Well, I'm here in a diplomatic role, so I'm never going to criticize, as you understand. I think you've got a lot of very talented people in politics. And there's a lot of talented young men and women in this room who may be in politics someday. So I encourage you to be involved and to become involved at every level, whether it's city government or at the national government. Become involved as a candidate or a volunteer, or be involved in programs, maybe be a minister someday, or if you're in international studies, be a diplomat someday. So that's the important part, is to participate in the process. You have a new prime minister who's always been in the opposition. So now that has the job of governing, that's different. And I know I certainly saw that when I was in Congress. It's always easier to be in opposition because it's easy to criticize. It's easy to point out the faults of those who are in charge. And once you're in charge and you're the government, the buck stops here, as we say. You're responsible for delivering services, delivering decisions, making decisions that benefit the people of the country you serve. Again, the new prime minister and his team are very talented people. So I think we all have high hopes, and we certainly want to be helpful and supportive to them. And I personally encourage that a real focus be economic, because a growing economy creates jobs, a growing economy creates tax revenue, a growing economy makes your country more attractive as a place to live, work, and do business. So I always encourage, I will continue to encourage your government to really focus on an economic agenda that attracts investment and brings new jobs and opportunity for the people of the country. All right. Thank you.
So let us thank you very much for being with us today here, and hope to see you again soon.
I hope so soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a good group. Not everybody asked a question.
Yeah, they wanted to ask you about the budget. It's my son, by the way.
Ah, which one?
The tall one.
Right here is the, okay. That's great. Hi.